Captain, we have them! We've established Transporter Lock, the Star Trek podcast. Join Ken and Sabriel each week as they explore strange new episodes, seek out new plots and new characters, and boldly go where no podcast has gone before.
Hello and welcome to Transporter Lock for Sunday, July 14th, 2024. I'm your co-host, Chief Engineer, Ken Gagney.
And I am First Officer Tiffany Bridge.
Hello, Tiffany. How are you today?
I am well, thank you. I am excited for the refuge of Star Trek.
As am I. Things happen in the world while I am watching Star Trek, and it's kind of nice to not be aware that they are happening and that I don't need to be doom scrolling for minute-to-minute updates. However, I do want to share with our listeners a completely unrelated conversation you and I were having, which was you and I were playing the game. If you were a Star Trek Discovery character, who would you be?
Always popular. Always popular.
And I think either you or we agreed that I am Tilly with a little bit of Linus. And I was rather taken aback by your description for yourself.
Oh, that I'm Commander Raynor.
That's right.
For sure.
The first officer in the 5th and final season, new character, and you just immediately glommed onto him.
Yes, that is because in pretty much every form of media, I glom on to the sort of gruff, emotionally constipated person who wants everyone to stop talking about their feelings all the time. I think that is my most natural state. I have grown past it in many ways, but on like a deep spiritual level, yes, Raynor and I are buddies. And look, Raynor starts to grow out of it too. There's hope for us all.
Well, that's interesting because on this podcast, I feel like you are very good about talking about other people's feelings.
Oh yeah, I work hard at paying attention to that because I didn't always. We all grow, we all progress. Mm-hmm. And I think by the end of the season, Raynor, I think, had shown a lot of growth and a lot more attunement to that on Discovery. So it's not that I can never do those things. It's just that I have to cultivate it, Ken.
Well, I think it's an important skill for a parent to cultivate, and I'm glad that you are.
I think it's important as well.
What's also important is the 2 new episodes of Prodigy that we have recently watched. We watched episode 7, The Fast and the Curious, and episode 8, Is There in Beauty No Truth? And we are here to talk about those episodes today. So let's start with The Fast and the Curious, obviously a play on The Fast and the Furious, a movie franchise I have never seen a single entry of.
The thing about The Fast and the Furious is that it gets progressively more ridiculous as the franchise goes on. Like, literally at one point, they are racing cars in space. I'm not making that up. But also about the Fast and the Furious is that it's about car racing. And so it fits in really well with the theme of this episode, which is a race of these like skiffs around a planet.
Before we get into that, I just need to ask, do you recommend the movie franchise?
I think that if you are looking for some like silly, good action fun, yes.
Okay.
I will tell you that one of the installments, the Rock appears in most of them until his inability to work with Vin Diesel got in his way. But in one of these installments, there like Dame Helen Mirren also appears, which means there is a movie starring both Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and Dame Helen Mirren, and you are able to watch this film on your screens. So yeah, I think you absolutely should watch these movies.
I will add them to my very long backlog.
And you know what? Don't feel like you have to start at the beginning and keep going. The plot is profoundly not the point. just pick it up, whatever.
It didn't seem to me like the kind of movie that I should be paying much attention to the plot.
You're not going to be spending a lot of time going, ooh, who's that guy? What happened? It's not a puzzle box.
Puzzle box. No, it is not. No. Cool. Well, good to know. But we got our own Star Trek version of The Fast and the Furious this week when the kids go through a Borg conduit. And let's just start right there. I haven't seen a Borg transwarp conduit since the finale of Voyager.
Voyager. Yeah, we're playing all of Voyager's greatest hits. We've got the Kazon, we've got the transwarp conduit. Yeah, I mean, I think like we're really like digging deep into that Delta Quadrant lore in this episode.
I mean, they could be playing to Deep Space Nine lore, they could be playing to Enterprise lore, but they're specifically going for Voyager. Do you think that Prodigy is attracting a disproportionate number of Voyager fans?
I don't know so much about that as so much as, look, they've got Janeway, they've got the Doctor. Why shouldn't they just, like dig in on that particular milieu, right?
Hmm.
Those are the pages that people are going to be looking for on Memory Alpha. So
Darn, she's on to me.
no, I mean, I think it's more like the writers are on to all of us, right? Like,
Hmm.
if we're going to have characters from Voyager, let's have the lore from Voyager. Because if you think about it, those are going to be the characters that are most likely to have expertise on these things. So let's put the right pieces in the right place, right?
Well, is that necessarily the case, though? Because the characters who encountered the Borg transwarp conduit and the Kazon are not any of the characters we know from Voyager.
That's true, but they are the characters that are going to start chasing after them.
That's true. They're always one step behind.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a show for kids. You always want the kids to be ahead of the grown-ups for at least a little while, right?
That's yes. Well, some would argue that they always are, but yes, that is true.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
this episode felt to me like it was fun. I enjoyed it, but it felt kind of light and fluffy. I kind of feel like between this episode and the next episode, they are going back to some Star Trek roots where even though they have a destination in mind, they're stopping at planets along the way and having like a Monster of the Week adventure.
Oh yeah, for sure. These are what one might call filler episodes. And for a long time, I think that was used as a pejorative term. But then as we got to like kind of what streaming has done to television seasons, right? Which is you get maybe 8 to 10 episodes of a season, and then you got to wait 3 years by the time it gets renewed and then produced and then released. And then you're lucky if you get like a third season of anything. There's really been a lot of sort of lamenting of like we don't really get filler episodes anymore. And if you think about it, some of the most iconic Trek is filler episodes. Like Darmok is a filler episode, and in my opinion, that's possibly the most iconic Trek episode of all time in terms of like a standalone story that everybody remembers, and everyone can refer to. Um, so I think it was kind of fun that we got a couple of filler episodes. You could also think of them as side quests. They're side quests. They are moving toward their overall destination, but these 2 weeks of storytelling didn't really directly. They weren't specifically about that mission, and I like it. I think in a nice 20 episode season, we've got room for it, and I like it.
Yeah, I totally agree with the need for filler episodes for a couple of reasons. One is that when you're watching something like Discovery, where the stakes are so high, you and I were talking just last episode about how you can't start at 10. And I feel like in
Right.
some ways, modern storytelling does start at 10 because they have to save the universe from annihilation. And that's their goal from episode 1 to episode 10. And there's no time to go hang out on the holodeck.
Right.
And sure, the holodeck as a technology is contrived, but it allowed for some really fun moments like Dr. Julian Bashir as a secret agent, having his
Mhm.
own James Bond episode, or Data going to the Old West. I just
Sure.
yesterday pulled up the clip in on YouTube where Data is walking out of the observation deck with Picard, where he's just had a meeting, and he stops and he spits into a plant, like
Hmm.
an old Western cowboy would. And I'm like, this is just such a fun, silly episode, and you don't get that with a lot of stories nowadays. But with Prodigy, yes, the total volume of content is the same as Discovery. 20 half-hour episodes equals 10 one-hour episodes. But since each half hour is a self-contained story, you are getting twice as many stories as Discovery. And that
For
does
sure.
give them time to create these filler episodes. And I love it. I'm here
Right.
for it.
And let's just, why not have a pod race while we're at it? you know.
Pod
And I think
race.
this is like a really time-honored, like as you said, this is a really time-honored tradition in Star Trek. Certainly the original series had those kinds of episodes where you're like, somebody came to you with like a box of costumes from another show, didn't they? And now here you all are, suddenly like, suddenly now you're on a gangster set and you were trying to figure out what to do with you were trying to figure out what to do with a bunch of like suits and fedoras. And Strange New Worlds, I think, does that really well too. It's like they had that whole like medieval fantasy episode. So yeah, this is good stuff. I'm here for it.
Yeah, me too. What did you think about this particular episode? Any insights or observations?
Well, I think I thought it was just like a nice self-contained, like um I'm trying to remember the movie that I'm thinking of. Is this like a speed racer kind of situation? Like, okay, we've been abducted by a bad guy and we have to win a race to get out of it. Um, Great, wonderful. We don't need more plot than that. And then right there at the end, we see the twist, right? Is that the uh, the Kazon who has captured them is not really the one pulling the strings after all. Oh, I just thought that was like a nice little twist because I had been thinking that like we've seen this trope in a bunch of other places. Certainly Thor Ragnarok, we've seen this. And I kept wanting to call the Kazon the Grandmaster. Like I just kept like tripping on wanting to call him the Grandmaster. That's all. That's all I was gonna say.
One of the tropes I hate most in any science fiction story, and this happened in the Netflix She-Ra series as well toward the end, spoiler, is when people are taken over, their minds are controlled, and you have like a loved one fighting a loved one, and they have to, and they end up screaming, "You have to fight it! I know you're still in there. You have to resist it." And like, I am so tired of this trope, and I'm so relieved at how short-lived it was in this episode.
Right. Right. Really didn't spend very much time at all with any of our heroes being controlled.
Yeah, I found the hints that they were laying earlier with the Kazon, where he kept snapping back and forth between two personalities, pretty obvious. It implied to me that, okay, this race is fun and silly, but we know there's going to be more to it than just that. So that was a
Sure.
nice little teaser of something to look forward to. The fact that it was a computer that had evolved was very TOS to me.
Sure. Absolutely. That's well-worn Star Trek territory, but I also feel like I'm not tired of it, you know? Like
Hmm.
let's keep doing that. Let's especially right now as a lot of the cultural conversation is around like AI or large language learning models, um, and what they can and can't do, and what kind of work they can and can't replace that humans used to do. Like by all means, let's keep that idea of like the computer that gets too smart for our own good in the zeitgeist. Let's do it.
It is something we've seen recently. I mean, anytime the Borg show up, including in this episode, it shouldn't be a surprise that there's a mind controlling computer too far away. And also in Discovery Season 2, the whole reason they went into the future was to escape control, which was an AI that took over the head of Section 31.
Sure, sure, for sure.
So I'm glad again. So again, I'm glad that this computer wasn't threatening the galaxy. It was just this. It was a pod racing training simulation that got too smart, and then it blew up. Boom.
Yeah. It's like it's a pod racing training simulation. They got too big for its britches. And one of the things that I enjoy about this, and I think is a function of the fact that the episode only has to be half an hour long, is that the way that they beat the computer, like there wasn't an elaborate subterfuge. It wasn't, this wasn't like the Enterprise trying to figure out how to beat Moriarty. Do you know what they did? Zero just launched themselves directly into the computer, like
Hmm.
percussive maintenance style, and crashed it, like literally crashed it. And then that solved the problem. Like, yes, I love a simple solution like that. Um, but I think that also sort of ties into a theme that I felt like really unified these two episodes in particular, which is this idea of you know these kids' devotion to each other to the point of pretty serious self-sacrifice. I think we see that in this episode as well as in the next one.
Yeah, Zero said that they have faith in their friends, and that's why they're willing to practically tear their limbs off to save them, which was a significant form of self-sacrifice. Even though they did survive the attack, they still are critically damaged. I was surprised that they were able to gain enough inertia or momentum to blow up the computer that badly without blowing up themselves, but that's necessary for the story. I'm not too
Yeah,
concerned
and
about it.
the thing about a thing that we need to remember about the Medusan is that they are not, I mean, they remind us repeatedly throughout the series they are non-corporeal, right? So we're really just talking about a containment suit. And so we wouldn't have seen Zero experience pain. Zero doesn't have a nervous system to experience pain, and it wasn't their being that was being injured, right? So I think it was really just a matter of building up enough thrust on the thruster on the back of the containment suit, like a bowling ball, right?
Hmm.
I laughed when I saw it. I was like, yes, this is exactly how we are solving this problem today. I'm here
So,
for it.
so are you saying that Zero was at no point in mortal danger?
I don't think that Zero was in mortal danger.
Okay.
Um, I think the computer probably would have had a hard time controlling them. And I also think that probably what Zero was more concerned about was the containment suit being damaged to the point that it couldn't protect their friends.
Yeah.
Because that suit
Oh,
isn't for Zero.
that's
The
true.
suit is for everyone around Zero.
That's true. I forgot about that. I mean, I think it's a little bit of both, but yes, especially the latter.
I think that is the case. And so while our friends are off doing this and having this particular adventure and getting back to the ship, Majel starts to notice that something's up.
Yeah, there are some things we do not have to wait long to see the holograms of our protagonist acting out of sorts back on Voyager. We see Dahl eating some very strange foods that I'm not sure even a Klingon would eat. What am I saying? A Klingon would eat anything. But yeah,
Right.
that was such a subtle part of the episode, or such a small part rather, that I kind of almost forgot it happened.
Well, and I think the doll in particular, having Zero's personality, it's like I've never tasted before, is really kind of a foreshadowing to the next episode, which I'm sure we'll get to in a moment or two. Um, but I had missed the first time I watched it. I've watched it now twice. I had missed that it was Gwyn who got Murph's personality, and so Gwyn was just chirping the whole time.
I totally missed that. I saw and heard Janeway allude to it in the next episode, but until she said that, I didn't realize that's what Gwen was doing.
Yeah. Yes, Gwyn was chirping like Murph the whole time.
And of course, Gwen played an important part at the end of the episode when they got attacked and disappeared.
Right. Like, so what is it that was trying to attack Gwyn? Like, that's the big question, right?
And what's the motive? Why would something attack Gwen?
And what has those kind of tentacles? Like, I have so many questions.
And did they say in the next episode that they were missing 8 minutes on the chronometer?
Yes.
That's a lot of time. That's a lot more time than we saw happen missing.
Right. Right.
Yeah, I mean, I'm reminded a little bit of the TV show The Flash, where they had some very inconsistent internal rules, let me tell you,
Oh
even
yeah,
more.
for sure.
But in some of the early seasons, anytime Barry would go back in time and time travel to change something, there would be time wraiths that would chase him and try to stop him from changing time. And we have seen temporal disturbances in this series so far. We're talking about they're changing the future, they're changing the past, they're changing the present. And I don't know if Gwen, being the one who's out of time, is being targeted to be taken out of time even further, to be completely removed from the timeline. And maybe that's what those mist wraiths are doing. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean that could be it could be certainly some sort of time wraith like creature trying to trying to chase after her, or maybe it's like a moth to a flame, like it's trying to feed on, like, I don't know, chronotons or whatever, whatever sort of Star Trek science hand wavy stuff we're talking about this week. So yeah, but I think that's a big question, right? Is like, okay, what was happening with that? Who's trying to kill Gwen and why?
And whatever this thing is fooled by holograms. So you would think that, to use what you just said as an example, if it's feeding off chronotons, hologram Gwyn should not be emitting chronotons. I know they're supposed to be exactly like their originals, but
That's a
that,
good point.
yeah, that's a pretty minute detail for
Yeah,
those kids to have replicated into a hologram.
that's a pretty good point. I hadn't thought about that. You're right. Um, yeah, so like, but we do know that they have that they are good enough to fool the doctor's scanners, right? So they have like life sign subroutines.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, like, so it's good enough to fool this critter, whatever it is. Um, so I don't know. Wow. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a question we didn't get answered on in this episode
Yeah.
or the next one,
Yep.
but I'm sure we'll see more about it soon.
We will. Shall we move on to the
Um,
next episode?
well, I just wanted to call out a couple of things that I found entertaining about this one.
Please
Just the
do.
things we had that I had just written down in my notes. So they're on the ship. They're on this tiny little ship and they're literally tripping over each other. Um, First thing is, like, it's a show for kids, so there's got to be poop jokes. And we had some poop jokes this week.
I am glad you're calling that out because I remember thinking when I saw Jankum Pog come out of the bathroom that I can't remember any other instance in 900 episodes of Star Trek where we've ever seen a character come out of the latrine.
No, we've never seen I don't think we've ever seen a character come out of the bathroom. And in fact, I think the only time we've ever even heard reference to the fact that humanoids have to do that was in Star Trek Discovery when Admiral Vance was talking to the woman from the Emerald Chain, and she was eating the apples from the fruit plate, and she was complaining that they're not as good. The replicated apples aren't as good as real apples. And then he tells her what replicated food is made of,
Mm-hmm.
which I will not repeat for the sake of our podcast rating. But it was a hilarious line. The way he delivered it was fantastic. And also, I had always suspected that, and I was just waiting for someone to confirm it, that that's what replicated food is made of.
And now you know.
So I think that is the only other poop reference we have had in Star Trek.
Well, I was really not hoping, I was expecting, given that Jankum Pog had just made that joke, while he came out of the bathroom to encounter Dahl doing a captain's log. There's a very old joke. What do you find in Picard's bathroom? Captain's log.
I don't think I've ever heard that one before.
I thought that's where they were going. I thought Jankum Pog was going to look at Dahl and be like, "Oh, I left a log of my own in there."
So I appreciated though that, like, so it's Jankum complaining about how smelly the ship is, right? And we all know that it's Jankum who's stinky. But then they get to the planet, and he's like, "Yes, I need fresh air." And he goes running for the door, and it turns out that the planet smells like farts. Like I just loved it. Like what this is such a Star Trek joke. Um, I enjoyed that. But I also enjoyed, like, from the, at the beginning, like, Dal's trying to still be the captain again. And this time all the other kids are like, "You're not the freaking captain." Like, you are not the captain. But then at the end, when it's time to do the log, he shares the log with Gwen.
So what do you think of
And
that? Do you think that he's heeding their advice that he's not the captain?
I just think we're seeing a little bit of personal growth from Dal, right? Because he kind of went off half-cocked in this race, and it put Gwen in danger. It put the whole thing in danger. And I just think, maybe we're seeing a little growth from our boy, from our little purple boy.
It's about time. As I mentioned, I've been watching Prodigy with my friend Commodore Mark, who's been on this show. And one of the comments he made that I meant to share sooner is that the Infinity, which they have stolen, in his estimation, looks less like a Star Trek ship and more like a Star Wars ship.
Yes, I have noted it's not as sleek, and it's tiny, right? Like It feels almost like a runabout size. Like it's a little bigger than a shuttle, but
It fits in a shuttle bay.
yeah. Yeah. So it feels kind of smallish. But yeah, I did notice that it doesn't have that sort of Star Trek look. And I am assuming that that's because they like lifted it from some, you know what I mean? It's probably stolen or appropriated or captured tech. So I live in Washington D.C. and we have, of course, the Air and Space Museum here, and it has an extension out near Dulles Airport called the Udvar Hazy Center, and it has and the Udvar Hazy Center is basically just a giant aircraft hangar, right? It's got all these planes in it. It's got a space shuttle that has actually been to space, and all of that. But one of the things it has is a Soviet MiG-21, and all of the other vessels have extensive cards talking about their provenance and what they did. But when you roll up to the MiG, the card just says courtesy of the CIA. You know, like they just found it parked out back at Langley and it said, let's send this to the Smithsonian. So, like, what it doesn't say, it's like there's so much more story behind it. And that is kind of what this ship makes me think of. Like, where'd they get it? Because it clearly wasn't designed by Starfleet engineers. So,
Right. It's some sort of a black ops mission that
yeah.
they got this ship from or for, and they were never supposed to have it, especially with a cloaking device.
Especially with a cloaking device.
But I guess if you can cloak it, who cares what it looks like? Because nobody can see it.
Yeah, yeah. So that is an interesting observation. I agree that it does looks more like something out of Star Wars.
And Dahl is a bit of a scoundrel.
A bit. Like he did fly with Ferengi traders for a while, so
That's right.
um so yeah, for sure. Uh Also I really like when Rock is looking for her hollow pad and we find it with Murph and he's like I was trying to figure out what he was doing. I'm like, is he watching workout videos? Is this like a Peloton situation? Because everybody was like doing push-ups and stuff over it. It was weird. And I was trying to figure out what was going on there. But of course, we still don't talk to Murph. We still don't actually know how to, I mean, we know how to talk to Murph, but the dolphins don't, or the whales don't fit on the Infinity.
They do not, sadly.
So there's no room for cetacean ops
Oh,
on the Infinity. So, but those are the things I wanted to call out.
cool. I like it. Do you also, yeah, anyway, that's good. I'm good. You good?
All right. Yeah, I'm good.
Great. Okay. Clap. Yay. Cool. In that case, let's go on to the next episode, season 2, episode 8. Is there in beauty no truth? And boy, do I have a lot of thoughts about this episode.
Yeah, this I have a lot of thoughts about, and as you know, because we talked about this ahead of time, um, the episode title "Is There in Beauty No Truth" directly references an episode title from the original series. It was "Is There in Truth No Beauty," and that was the episode that introduced the concept of the Medusans to the canon.
Mm-hmm.
And I know we both watched that episode in prep for tonight's recording, but I think let's talk through the Prodigy episode, and then we'll kind of compare and contrast.
I agree.
So we start like Zero's really feeling this like loss of function, right? Which I think is common. I think their accessibility aid has been damaged, right? So like imagine somebody who uses a wheelchair to get around, and suddenly now there's no wheelchair. And, Zero, in some ways, it's even worse because Zero absolutely can get around as a Medusan. Like, presumably the Medusans can propel themselves, but not without a serious damage to their friends. So, so that's something they're really struggling with. And they're, wondering, like, what good are they? What is their role now? And then they sort of stumble upon this planet where like, hey, there's more Medusans here. They say they can fix my suit. Let's go. And like everybody's like super generous and great. And so of course, like from the very beginning, I'm like, okay, there's gonna be a catch. What's the catch? When's the catch coming? And but like everybody is what I thought was interesting about this episode. Well, let's just talk through it a little bit more. They get down to the planet, and the Medusans that we meet are these like beautiful sylph-like genderless creatures. They have bodies, like apparently organic bodies. Um, and that is rather surprising to Zero. And then I think we see these creatures become really, really fascinated. Like, did you notice like they're in the background, like sniffing Jankum? Like his stench is so pungent.
They were trying out his armpits. Yeah.
Yeah. Because like the physical senses are something that is not available to non-corporeal species.
Hmm. Yeah, the ability to create a new body was surprisingly easy given that in it was Discovery, like they had to wait until 900 years into the future where they could easily create a golem, basically modeled
Hmm.
after Picard's, and lure this Trill consciousness into it. And
Sure.
if they had known about this planet, they probably would have just been like, "Oh, let's just go to that planet and put them in a pod and let a new body get grown for them." And I understand again that the arc of storytelling and Discovery is very different from Prodigy. Prodigy, you need to have a beginning, middle, and end in 30 minutes, not 10 hours. But yeah, it was as you said, you were wondering what the catch was. And I was concerned about the deception that the primary speaker for the planet had. But at the end, they actually proved kind of cool. Like, I know I'm going a bit out of order here, but when Zero made a decision about whether or not to keep this body, they were completely supported in that decision. There was no intimidation, there was no animosity, no resentment. There's just like, yeah, you do you, and we'll do us.
Yeah, and I think, I would agree. I would tend to agree with the Protostar crew, which is that like the information that they were withholding is sort of critical to decision making, right? But also at the same time, if Zero had known that they wouldn't be able that the help that they were being offered was temporary, if they chose to leave the planet, like would they still have accepted it?
I think so. I think they would have.
I think they would have, but I think it's what I felt like it was interesting that Ion was saying, well, we just gave them the choice. It's up to them to decide. Like, yes, but you also withheld like a fairly key bit of information, which is that the body really only works on this planet.
Yeah, they allowed Zero to make an uninformed decision, which is not a very good thing to let somebody do if you can help them do otherwise.
Right.
Yeah.
Um, so that was something that I thought was a little bit curious about this episode because they kept like so they get to like the flight they have the feast of the senses, right, which is very cool and fun and exactly how you would expect a formerly non-corporeal entity to have like the feast of senses was exactly what it sounded like.
Hmm.
Which I thought was very cool. And then the running of the Nazamon, that giant creature that was trying to eat them, as a way to experience fear. I couldn't quite make the leap that they were making, where they seem to really be tying like, well, once you survive this, you'll never want to leave the planet, which is good because your body won't work. And so it became very important for the other kids to catch up with Zero and tell them that during the race. And I just like I didn't think that it was necessary to tie those like from a logical perspective. Certainly from like a storytelling dramatic perspective it makes sense. But from a logical perspective, like those two things don't have to be related. And I don't understand why they're related.
Yeah, they certainly seem to be implying that the fear you experience from almost losing your life is it's so exhilarating that it really cements your decision to keep your body. I guess it's like a more lethal version of bungee jumping or skydiving.
Yeah.
Like it makes you feel so alive that you can't imagine not doing that or not having the option to do it anymore. But yeah, I did find it a little tenuous as well.
Yeah, seemed a little bit tenuous, though I did enjoy the bit where they're running from the Nazamon and Zero looks at their friends and says, "Isn't this amazing?" And they're like, "No, it very much is not, actually." Right? Because they're corporeal, they know exactly what the fear of mortality feels like.
Right. Yeah. And when that creature was hinted at through the clouds and we didn't know what it was yet, I, for some reason, really thought slash hoped it was a dragon. And instead it ended up being a manta ray, which is
Yeah.
more Star Trek. Sure, that makes sense. But the fact that it was like practically hollow on the inside and couldn't close its mouth, it really did feel like some sort of a biological ship.
It did. Like, it was strange that they could just sort of like hang out in its mouth and like look down. Like, that was a little weird. But sure, why not?
Yeah,
Right. Um, but yeah, I thought I also was thinking dragon, but like we're not doing Tolkien in here.
not yet.
Um, Not yet.
Now,
Um,
there are two things about this episode that fundamentally made me a little uncomfortable. One of them is that when they were racing to find Zero to tell them this news, this connection that had to be made, they were looking at each and every person on this planet, trying to figure out which one was Zero, which implies to me that they all look the same, that these bodies that are generated for them are practically identical. And you can then do whatever you want with it to like dress it up and accessorize it and make it unique. But it was weird to me that every body was the same. And I mean that very literally. There was an episode of Twilight Zone that was like this, where they decided that differences were bad. And the only way for people to live in harmony is for us to all look the same. And, that's like the Twilight Zone was the Black Mirror of its day. And
mhm.
we kind of had that in this episode where, oh, Medusans, it's so great if we all look the same, isn't it? And I'm like, no, no, it's really not.
Well, I was thinking about that as well during the Feast of Senses scene when Rock is hesitant to dance because she feels too big. And, like I referenced kind of early on as we were in one of our early episodes that like I watched Rock sort of step sideways through like a turbolift door and was like, can we just like if the Jeffries tubes can be giant, like why can't the turbolift doors accommodate the size of Rock's body? And I did feel like, gosh, everybody's like the same general size and shape. And and yes, like you said, like they paint their faces different ways and things like that. But they are all so similar that yes, they couldn't pick Zero out of a crowd anymore. Um, but also I felt like that could also be a function of the fact that Zero had really only had that body for a few hours at that point, and they just may not have been used to it yet. Like it was like they were still kind of coming to terms with the fact that like Zero is huggable now. Like, okay, great, like beautiful and green and has these lovely eyes, but also like we can hug Zero.
I was surprised that Zero knew how to run because they were very awkward at the Feast of the Senses, and then all of a sudden they have to literally run for their lives, and they were able to do so.
Yes. Yes. They got used to their legs pretty quick, like a baby horse, right? Like baby horses learn to run very quickly.
For listeners who don't know, because this is something I learned relatively late in life, which is the reason that a lot of mammals, like horses and deer, can walk so quickly after being born, whereas it takes a human baby forever, is because those animals, those horses and their deer, they're like hard coded to be able to walk and not much else. Whereas humans are more plastic and can learn a lot of things throughout their entire lives. And so it takes longer to boot up that system because there's so much breadth to it.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and also there's an evolutionary advantage to being able to outrun predators right away, which is not necessarily like the human baby's trade-off is that its parents will pick it up and run with it if there's a predator nearby.
Right. Yes, there's that
But
as well.
yes,
I mean, that's one of the so-called advantages to being an apex predator.
right.
Mhm.
Right. I thought it was cute though, like this Feast of Senses where like Zero's like, this looks amazing, but why is my stomach angry? And the kids are like, that's hunger. You have that now.
Hmm.
I just thought that was really adorable. I loved watching the kids be so happy for Zero. I thought that was really sweet, and it really kind of ties again back into that theme that we talked about earlier. When we get to the end and Zero decides to leave the planet, even though it might mean that that body deteriorates and they start to lose their senses, um, because like these are like these friends of theirs had just literally risked their lives just to give them like one more piece of information that they needed. And I think like just returning to that theme of these kids' devotion to each other,
Mm-hmm.
that I really think like exceeds the devotion of even like a bridge crew on a
Mm-hmm.
starship.
Yeah, at the beginning of the episode, when they have the option to go to this planet and try to get Zero's body fixed, Dahl says, we need to beeline to this destination. And everybody else says to Dahl, Zero just risked their lives for us. We need to repay that favor. And the moment that I really liked in this episode, my favorite moment in this episode, is when Dahl and Gwyn are sitting at the dinner table at the Feast of Senses. And Dahl says, thank you for speaking up for Zero. I'm sometimes in such a rush to get to where we're going that I forget to stop and take a breath. And that just seemed really out of character for Dahl in a good way.
Right.
And I really enjoyed hearing that said. I just thought that was a moment of growth for that character. And then, of course, he drinks something amazing. And he's like, what is in this? And then he sees Gwyn is sad and he goes over and holds her hand. And then, it was a really up and down scene in terms of tone, but I liked how it
Mhm.
started.
Yeah. No, I think I really enjoyed their like moment of quiet reflection where they just kind of got to sit there and like check in with each other a little bit.
Yeah.
It's been kind of go, 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 run, run, run with them. And I appreciated the self-awareness from Dal. Self-awareness is hard, well into adulthood. So it's nice to see it kind of glimmering a little bit.
It is. And also at the Feast of Senses, I liked, and you were saying that Zero was trying all these new foods, very much remind me of Data in Star Trek Generations, going to 10 forward, getting served a drink he hated by Guinan and asking for seconds.
Yes, because he's so excited about the sensation of hating it. Like, I hate this. This is revolting,
Mm-hmm.
but being excited about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking of that as well during
Mm.
this like just the ability to hate something so viscerally because suddenly you have viscera.
Right. Exactly. Like, wow, Viscera's new. I mentioned there were two things that made me uncomfortable about this episode. The first being that all the bodies look the same. The second was in a lot of science fiction, and we've seen this in Star Trek and especially in Lower Decks, the idea that humans either want to or will evolve to the point where they don't need corporeal forms. This bias that non-corporeal forms are evolved slash superior to us biological beings. And in this episode, we saw sort of the opposite. We saw a Medusan wanting a body, wanting to, again, in that structure I just described, debase themselves by having a physical body. And I understand the grass is always greener on the other side, but the idea that the Medusan, in this case, Zero, as well as everybody else on the planet, would want to be something that they're not. And maybe that's a lesson for our listeners or the show's viewers, the kids that the show is aimed for. Maybe that's something for them to learn. A lot of things in Prodigy are about learning to be yourself, learning to be true to who you are. Jankum Pog did that. He tried to be polite, and what he really needed to do was percussive maintenance. And once he fell back into himself, things started to work. And so we see this again in this episode where Zero is like, I want to be something that I'm not. I want to have a body just like all my friends. And they try that. And in a lot of ways, it's wonderful. And their friends accept them for it. But in the end, they're like, no, in order to be with my friends, I need to be myself. And that's somebody who doesn't have a body. And that's an important lesson to learn. And uh, I'm not uncomfortable in the sense that they did it. But at the beginning of the episode, the idea that transforming yourself would be so attractive, that concept makes me uncomfortable. And I think I like the way they handled it.
Well, I think, interesting. I think that what's like Zero is going to leave the planet in that body because it sounded to me like what they were saying is that the body itself would deteriorate over time. And so Zero is going to walk onto the infinity on their lithe green legs and sit down in seats and have those like sparkly eyes that we saw for a while. And it'll be interesting to see, how does that body deteriorate over time and how quickly and what does that mean? But like what that tells me is that much like Gwyn, they've got like a physical limitation that's on a timer. Because at some point, if that body deteriorates entirely, like does Zero leave that body? Are they mortal? Or do they return to a state where they can cause madness, if you look at them?
Or did the
So,
inhabitants of that planet repair the mechanical body and send them off with that? Because we don't actually see them get on the Infinity. We don't know what body they left in.
yeah, that's true. But like they did specifically talk about like the like I know that these senses will deteriorate over time. So I was taking that to mean that they were going to walk out of there tall and green.
5 minutes is a period of time in which that body could deteriorate.
I mean, that's true too. I guess we'll find out next time.
Right. I think they left the ending ambiguous. We don't know the state of the mechanical body, whether it's repaired and whether it's occupied.
Right.
And so we don't
Right.
know what Zero is going to look like at the beginning of episode 9.
And we'll find out soon enough. But of course, this episode does, as we said, directly reference an episode of the original series from the third season.
Mm-hmm.
The name of it is There in Truth No Beauty?
Mm-hmm.
So the reverse of this episode's title. And it is, like I said, it is the episode that introduces the Medusans to the canon. And you watched it today. And I don't want to derail us and talk all the way through that episode. I don't think it's necessary. But I did want to call out just a few things about it.
Please.
First of all, it is hilarious to me in that episode that the Medusan ambassador, Kolos, is played by a metal box with a light fixture inside it. Like there's all of these like dramatic shots of the ambassador, and it's just this box sitting on the floor. Like, oh, we're escorting the ambassador to his quarters now, and they're just carrying this box around the ship. Like that was funny. And then it would like open its lid and the light would flash and it would drive people insane. And all I could think of was the briefcase in Pulp Fiction. Like there was just something very funny about that.
Yeah, Pulp Fiction is where I learned the term MacGuffin from.
Yes. Right. And it's like a literal MacGuffin, right? Because the other thing about that episode is that the ambassador barely impacts the action until the very end. Like it really, they really are just sort of sitting there in the box most of the time. And all of the action is the humans around it.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the ambassador is accompanied by their telepathic human assistant, who is played by none other than Diana Muldaur, who played Dr. Pulaski on The Next Generation. So that was a kind of a fun, familiar face to see.
I have been very transparent on this podcast about the fact that TOS is the only live action Star Trek that I've not seen every episode of. It was written for different generation, different sensibilities, different pacing. And so there are a lot of gaps in my Star Trek knowledge when it goes back to the 1960s. This is an episode I had never seen until today. And to your point, I recognize the actor playing Dr. Miranda Jones, but I couldn't quite place it. The closest I could think of was Deirdre Hall, but I'm like, no, the era is too, that's not right. I don't think she would have been acting in Star Trek in the 60s. She's not that old. And then of course, I looked up in Memory Alpha. I was like, oh my gosh, Dr. Pulaski. So I did recognize them. I just got the actor wrong. But what really struck me about this episode, and again, we don't need to go into the whole thing, but I had forgotten just how sexist and ableist TOS was.
That whole episode was just like men behaving like idiots around a beautiful woman and just like slavering all over themselves. Like what is right? And some of that was like the point, right? Some of that was like the source of dramatic tension, was like these guys being so distracted by her beauty. But man, like it was really something. And I say this as someone who watched TNG and saw like how questionable some of the behavior on TNG was, like some of the jokes that were made. It is like, wow, the 60s were a different time. Like they were just a different time.
Yeah, not just the men, the way they were behaving in this episode, but the woman as well. It's like women aren't allowed to do these things. Women can't feel these things. And when I say ableism, I'm referring to them saying, you're blind, you can't navigate a starship. And then 20 years later, Gene Roddenberry goes and gives Geordie LaForge the
Mhm.
helm of the Enterprise. And he did that on purpose. He thought, he said, I want to have the ship piloted by a blind person. And I'm like, in TOS, you explicitly said that can't be done.
Gene could grow and change too, right?
Yes.
And I don't want, and when I say that art is always in conversation with the culture that created it, I don't want to say that to like dismiss the bad behavior, the sexism, the ableism, but like nonetheless, like social consciences change over time,
Mhm.
and we should not expect it's always been forward looking, but where it's forward looking from has changed.
Yeah. And when I point out that the difference between Dr. Miranda Jones and LeVar Burton, I'm sorry, Geordie LaForge, I'm not doing that to call Gene Roddenberry a hypocrite
Sure.
because, we all have those grandparents or those uncles that we don't want to talk politics with. And in my father's case, he would say things that were not appropriate. And he would just shrug his shoulders and say, well, that's the way I learned it when I was growing up. And I'm like, okay, Dad, that's the reason you're speaking that way. That's not an excuse for why you're talking that way. And now that you know better, you should do better. So Gene Roddenberry, he learned better. He did better. And I applaud him for that.
Sure. Because I mean, all any of us can do is better than we did before.
That's right.
Um, but I think it's something that I thought was sort of a couple of things that I thought were interesting through lines from that episode to this corresponding episode of Prodigy. Um, is this idea of deception and where the deception is located. Because in the TOS episode, the deception, like there's a lot of really terrible behavior by the men, but the but Miranda Jones is also really kind of like she has a lot of jealousy because she's concerned about her place as the ambassador's assistant, because of her skills. And so she has this sort of difficult relationship with Spock throughout the episode because he is also able to connect to the ambassador. And towards the end of the episode, when Spock's life is in danger, she kind of hesitates on saving his life. Um, whereas, so just this idea of like truth and beauty and who do you believe under what circumstances and who do you question or not question. I thought those were some similar themes. But then also in this episode of the original series, when Spock joins his mind to the Medusan so that they can get back into the galaxy, um, the ambassador gets to experience corporeality for the first time and sort of marvels at how isolating it is because the Medusans are all sort of able to commingle, much like the changelings are. But also it seems very reluctant to give up the experience when it's time, right? Kirk insists that it's time to release Spock and let him go. And the ambassador's like, do we have to do that now? You could just tell that like the ambassador's like, I would really love to try food, right? Um, and I think that that is something that I always sort of struggle with as like a person in middle age who's like, I wake up with back pain and things like that is like, man, these meat suits, they are so inconvenient. It is so inconvenient to be corporeal. But at the same time, our bodies are what mediate all kinds of experiences for us. Like our bodies are how we get to taste and enjoy food. Our bodies are how we get to hug our loved ones. Our bodies are how we get to experience bungee jumping. And so like sometimes we tend to think of ourselves as minds riding around in a body, but in many ways, we are bodies. We're bodies. We are physical creatures. That's how we experience the world. Um, So that was something I was thinking about a lot as I was watching Zero experience what it's like to have senses for the first time.
And being our bodies is also what makes us mortal. You know,
Yes.
the idea that we can divide the software from the hardware is where we get the idea of an afterlife, I think, in
Sure.
in some fashions, in some contexts. And the older I get, the more I think you can't separate them. That, you know, and so let's enjoy these bodies while we have them, because we don't all grow up to be Medusans.
No, we don't. Some of us actually need the physical act of our neurons
Mm.
firing in order to have a consciousness.
And also, the actor Leonard Nimoy was 37 years old when he mind melded with a Medusan. And that's a pretty good age if you're going to have to experience corporeality for the first time.
Right, right. You're not quite old enough to like, you're not like I injured myself sneezing years old yet.
Right? I slept wrong. I woke up wrong.
Injured myself while sleeping.
That was the one thing I was good at, was sleeping.
Right.
Oh, well. Well, this has been a fun trilogy of episodes for us to talk about.
Yeah, I enjoyed the chance to go back and refer to the original series, right? So we had talked last week about how I have rewatched like most of like pretty much all of 90s Trek in the last couple of years. So that's mostly still fresh in my mind, but I haven't watched the original series since I was a kid.
Oh,
And
wow.
so, getting to bust out one of the 60s episodes and then yeah, sit there and like watch the pacing and the difference in acting style. Like that was a trip.
You had texted me a few hours before we were going to record this podcast to say, by the way, did you know that this title is a reference to a TOS episode? I just watched it. And I was like, oh, Tiffany's going to make me look bad. I better go watch it myself. So of course, my motivation was tongue in cheek, but nonetheless, I did watch this episode because you had, and otherwise, I might have died never seeing this episode. So thank you for enriching my life in that fashion.
I'm happy to do it. I'm happy to do it. The other thing I was thinking of as I was watching is when I was a kid, like I was, 7 or 8 years old watching these things with my parents. And, you know, Kirk and Spock and Bones all felt so old to me from that age because my parents were young, right? They would have been only in their 20s when we were watching this. And now I'm watching this. I'm like, man, like Spock, Leonard Nimoy was so young when they filmed this, and like he was 37 years old. I'm all like, to me, like they were always like well into, they were always middle aged, and it turns out they were actually not at all middle aged. Maybe DeForest Kelly, but
Well, I'm sure somebody has pointed this out to you at some point, but John Ratzenberger, who played Cliff Clavin on Cheers, he is going to the bar and as a postal worker who's not happy with his job and talking about being middle-aged and life isn't going the way he thought it would. He was 35 years old.
you're not allowed to be that discontented at 35.
I think we are allowed. You and I are as we discussed, are the same age right now for a few more months. We are allowed to be malcontents.
Yeah, but we are also solidly in middle age now.
Don't remind me.
So well, no, when you wake up with neck pain, that will remind you for me.
Well, fortunately, I haven't hit that point. I am still young and lively and immature. Um, Speaking of being immature, you and I have a couple of vacations this coming week. We didn't plan it that way, but we happen to both be taking some time off from work the same week, which means that you and I will probably not have our schedules aligned, and we probably won't be watching Prodigy for a little while. So you and I have been pumping out these podcasts about 2 episodes per week. And this episode that you're listening to right now might be the last one for about a week.
Sure.
But we will be back. We've recorded 4 out of 10 podcasts that we're planning on for this season of Prodigy. We'll probably be done sometime in like mid-August, but
Yeah.
but we'll be back by late July.
Yep. We'll be back before too long. Because I want to find out what happens next. I'm really excited.
That's the same reason I want to be immortal. I want to find out what happens next. But until we do,
Go fast.
If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on iTunes and keep your hailing frequencies open by following us on Twitter at TransporterLock or subscribing to our podcast and email newsletter at transporterlock.com.
Also, I was just randomly looking at Memory Alpha, and there was a character in this episode of Prodigy, one of the runners that was speaking as they were trying to save their lives from the flying manta ray, not a main character. And the voice actor, Kari Walgren, has also played 10 other characters on Lower Decks.
Yeah. Voice actors, man.
Yeah, I missed my calling. I'm not saying I would have been good at it. I'm just saying I would have liked it.